Welcome to Digital Talk Podcast, where we spotlight entrepreneurs and innovators leveraging technology related to telecoms to drive positive global impact. I'm here with my co-host Frankie Spagnolo, and we'll be talking today with Brad White, who is partner at Precision Animal Solutions based in Manhattan, Kansas. In this episode, we'll be finding out more about Brad and the project Precision Animal Solutions have been working on to try and eradicate the main disease affecting cattle once they have been weaned.
Today's episode is sponsored by IFG Consulting Europe, a leading business growth consultancy representing promising software providers selling to the telecoms, enterprise and mobile markets in Europe. Go to ifgconsultingeurope.com to find out more.
Hi, Frankie.
Hey, Ian. How you doing? I'm excited to learn more about this. This is actually one of the entries or projects that we found through the GSMA Global Award process, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think it was Eseye who put it forward. It's a good story indeed. And I don't think we'd have come across it otherwise. And I think it's our first podcast on animals.
Yeah, certainly during the Discovery series. And I'm interested to see, because, you know, the connected cow, right? That go-to standard when we talk about how over-connected everything has become, right? But Brad and the team at Precision Animal Solutions are doing just that. So without further ado, Brad, welcome to Digital Talk.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity, Frankie and Ian. I think this is a good topic, a fun one to talk about. So I can introduce myself, Brad White. I'm a veterinarian, work with Precision Animal Solutions, also work at Kansas State University, so have a couple hats that I wear. Today we'll be talking about our Precision Animal Solutions, and that is actually started by a group of veterinarians. So I have some partners that we've worked with to come up with the technology that we'll be discussing today.
And so that's a lot of things you've got. Ian had shared with me about a professor. That's a lot of passions that seem to have all come in together into this one solution. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the solution and how you came about starting this project?
Sure. So let's start with the problem, and then we'll work our way to the solution. So one of the issues that we face in cattle, and through most of my career, we have battled with respiratory disease or pneumonia. So when we think about pneumonia in cattle, it's similar to pneumonia in people in that it will make them feel bad. We want to identify it early so that we can treat it early because we have some effective treatments, but we have to be able to identify it. Now let's think through the process of in cattle. Pneumonia causes many of the same things that it does in people. Certainly we could see a cough, but that's not the first sign that we see. Often the first sign that we see is that they're a little bit depressed. And by depressed, they're not as active as they normally are. They're not eating like they normally are. And it's harder to identify in cattle because just by looking at them, they're not going to tell us when they're sick or not. So we started with that problem, and my partner and I several years ago started looking at, are there ways that we could actually quantify or measure behavioral changes in those animals? Because by instinct, when we go out and look, the most common way that we try to find respiratory disease in cattle or pneumonia is by a person watching them and looking at them. The problem with that scenario is cattle are by nature, they want to hide disease from people. They want to stay in a herd. So if an animal is just a little bit sick, they're going to try to hang out with all their buddies so that nobody notices that they are diseased.
Right. Who doesn't want to get singled out?
Doesn't want to get singled out. Exactly. And when we're there watching them, there's an effect of the person on the cattle themselves.
Right.
So we talked about how could we identify some of those animals more efficiently. And that's really what started the process down the road. So that outlines the problem. The solution that we've come up with is a device which monitors their behavior, and we use that to help figure out if they're sick or not.
Wow. But let me ask you, because the problem even really could go deeper. Cattle production has tremendous impacts on a range of sustainable challenges in the world. And if you're able to identify and have a healthier herd, then ultimately you should be having an impact on both the resource consumption and the food production levels.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we want to do is there are a lot of resources that go into cattle production. And I think there's real value that come from those resources. So there's a cost benefit, there's a return on those because we're
Right.
creating protein for human consumption. And it's actually a really efficient manner of creating protein from human consumption because cows can do something that you and I cannot, which is they can take grass, consume it, and change it into protein. We're not going to be able to consume it and process it in the same way. So they can actually use areas of the environment that you and I couldn't use. We couldn't grow crops on. We couldn't do anything like that for human nutrition, but cattle can. Now, here comes the rub. And this is what you were saying is if we have all that resource go into an animal and then later in life they become diseased and non-productive, then that's a loss. So what we're trying to do is trying to not just prevent those, but really try to identify them earlier in the process so that we can effectively treat them and get them over that pneumonia. So being able to watch that behavior helps us identify them at a reasonable time.
And not even actually watch them, though. Watch from afar, like in a suspended quantum stage.
Yes, monitor them from afar.
Right.
Yeah.
So what, given on the entrepreneurial side of this, given that I think this is a problem, and I think I'd ask you to quantify it as well, how big the problem is globally, if at all possible. But you were there and you said, we want to do this, but there must have been already other doctors, vets, other people who've had given this a shot as well. So what made you feel that you had a better approach or made you say, let's focus our time and energy on this? I'm sure that's an interesting story in itself.
Good question, Ian. So one of the things that we did is we're veterinarians. We're not tech guys, right? So we're talking about technology stuff today, and hopefully you guys don't get too deep into it because that's not what I do. And it's like when you first framed the question to me, you said, tell me about the solution. And that's not where I started. I started with the problem. That's not where we started down this path either. We did not start with a solution. We started with a problem. And so we have actually spent years testing multiple potential solutions. So we've looked at multiple different technologies. We've looked at multiple different aspects. What type of devices could we use? Because alternatively, you're exactly right, Ian. Are there other people exploring this? Yes, lots. And many of them have started with a device and said, how can we use this device to solve a problem? We started with a problem and evaluated a whole bevy of devices and said, we're agnostic to which device can solve this problem. We don't care which one it is because we're not hardware people. What we care is about solving the problem. And what has evolved has been very interesting in the aspect, and this gets us into the technology a little bit, is what we identified was there are several key components of behavior that we need to measure. And it's not just one. Many devices could measure one component of behavior, and I'll break them into three broad categories of what we measure. One is activity. Simply, how much do they walk around? How active are they? How does that vary by time of day? So activity. Two is how much time do they spend in areas of interest? And areas of interest would be things like the feed and the water. Three, and this is the kicker and where we needed to talk to some others to get the technology, is social behavior. And by social behavior, there's really two broad aspects that you could think of. One, how much time do they spend in the group? And two, how much time do they spend by themselves? And all of those things are time dependent. Now, cattle are like us in the standpoint that their social patterns differ by individual. Meaning, I might be very social and spend time with people all the time, and you might be very unsocial and not spend as much time with people. But what we're looking for is changes and modifications in those patterns. So back to your question, how did we come up with this process? we did a bunch of testing of a bunch of different technologies. And there were times that we had multiple technologies on animals to figure out what pieces of data we needed, what pieces of information we needed. What we found.
Ran with your stack.
That's right. And how to figure out which of those pieces of information were important and which weren't. And we identified something in both piles, right? And so we identified a lot of stuff that wasn't important and some stuff that was important. Mm-hmm. And as we worked through the process, our goal, being non-technology people, was when we get done and we figure out what's important and what's not, we'll just go buy something off the shelf and that's what we'll use. Right. There we encountered a problem.
Right. Yeah, right.
As you can imagine.
And back to the beginning.
Yeah, as you can imagine, when we got through that process, there wasn't something that was on the shelf that provided us the specific solution. And that's where we started working with Eseye. And Eseye is a company that we got engaged with. And they really helped us through the process of saying, what are your specific needs? And at that point, we had done enough work to identify, these are the things we need. This is the form that we need it in. And this is how we're going to need the data to come back. And they worked with us to design a specific solution, which is where I think you guys encountered us or heard of us is that solution went for the GLOMO entry.
Correct. I think it'd be interesting if you could break it down. Our podcast is around how you can do good and create a better world in connection to telecommunications. So if you could maybe break it down into these sort of different categories of what are the sensors that you're using and connectivity? And then I believe the secret sauce, which you were alluding to, was the data analytics and the AI sort of component. Those things, the connectivity and the sensors are providing you the data, but on top of that, you're actually then creating a secret sauce. I don't know if that's an American term, but we do use it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's secret sauce and everything, right? So the connectivity, we've tried a bunch of different types. And one of the things, and I may back up a little bit in order to effectively answer your question, Ian, because it's a good one. We're monitoring cattle in a variety of environments, and we're monitoring them in many areas that are rural where you're not going to have broadband internet everywhere, right? So we're setting up a process to where we're going to monitor these individuals. Now, there are times, and we've done this in the past on some of our projects, and we're looking to do it in the future, where we're monitoring thousands of individuals in a relatively small area.
Sure.
One of the things that we have to think about is how do the technologies play well with each other and with existing technologies in that space. Yeah. So we've been using some Bluetooth. We've had some self-contained, what I'll call units, which are sometimes housing areas for those cattle, which have a device which will collect some of the data. So there's a Bluetooth connectivity both between the tags and a collection device, right, which then uploads it to the cloud or uploads it locally, depending on where the system is located. And that allows us to have that connectivity. And I think a couple things that are a little bit novel, at least from my perspective with this problem, is you have all of those different animals and we're collecting readings because of the nature of what we do. We're collecting readings frequently. Mm-hmm. So we're actually getting readings from animal to animal multiple times per minute in some cases. And as you can imagine, the data volume can become quite large. Okay. And then we do some post-processing data analytics, as you alluded to, Ian. We'll work on coming up with what are the ways that we can better identify those cattle early.
And on that basis, would you call it machine learning or AI? I mean, one of the big topics of today's world, everyone seems to say if you can throw AI in, that's your $1 million company straight out there. Well, how are you actually, this data analytics bit, is that a skill set that you have from your background? You've got a team of guys working with you who's doing that sort of work?
Correct. We've done that within our Precision Animal Solutions group. So we've done machine learning and we have created these models. And one of the interesting things about them is in the way that we've created them, as you can imagine, cattle production around the world differs and environment differs. And so we have done projects where we have monitored cattle in Canada, the southern part of the US, Australia, and those environmental conditions vary greatly. So, as you can imagine, in the southern part of the US or in Australia in the summertime, very hot. Canada in the winter, very cold. Those environmental conditions, because cattle live outside, impact their behavior. The
Right.
way
So
that
they
we have
become
set up,
metrics.
yeah, it becomes something that we have to be aware of because that may change behavior. And we don't want the system thinking, okay, these cattle are sick when
Right.
they're just experiencing environmental change. So we've actually tested these algorithms in those different environments and have found out that, yes, we can still identify because of the way we monitor and because we monitor so many things on an individual animal. So I broke it into 3 categories earlier.
Right.
We actually measure about 115 different variables on those individual animals. So as we go through that process, we can actually sort out which are the sick animals regardless of some of those environmental conditions.
Where is the sensor or the device on the cow in order to pick up all those kind of metrics?
So the tag that we use is an ear tag. And one of the things that we've done is we wanted it to fit into the standard production flow, standard production practices on many of these operations. Most cattle have an identification ear tag, which is a tag that fits in their ear and allows us to visually see, okay, who is this animal? Allows us to keep track of their records. What have they done in the past? What do we know about them? So what we have done is we have added the electronics to this tag, which has been part of the process of developing, and where we've worked with SI on is being sure that the technology is robust yet small enough to fit on that tag. And the robustness is, think of it this way, some of these animals will get to be 800,000 pounds more. And so just them simply
Bumping up
laying on
against
their
each other.
tag, right? Or rubbing on each other, they're being soft for them. But most electronics, and I could send you some pictures of some early versions of these that I've sent back to our crew. And I'm like, am I supposed to be able to see the circuit board like this or no? And they said no. Yeah.
No.
That's cool.
Those are some unique challenges. And really, actually, I think it's what I find most valuable about what you guys have done with Eseye, because so much tech, especially mass manufactured stuff, it's tech for tech's sake. And what you guys have really done is you've built it from, like you said, the problem up. And that has a sustainable impact on e-waste as well, right? Your product is going to be sturdier. It's going to last longer. You know, you're going to have a complete solution instead of needing 3 that are doing what you want. And I think the process of what you went through is very valuable. Not being a technologist, was it easy to find SI? Or is there any words of advice to our industry to make that process a little bit better? What are your thoughts after that whole thing?
I'm glad that you said that because it's been a long process, right? Was it easy to find SI? No, not at all. And we were stuck in the mindset of we'll be able to find something. And I said off the shelf earlier, but obviously we're working directly with companies, right? We'd be able to find something that we could tweak or modify only slightly, and it would meet our needs. And the challenge through the process was actually finding someone that said, what are your tech specs? And let's work from there rather than here's what our thing will do. See if you can make that work. And I think that's the key thing, that once we turn that switch, and part of it is, and I'll just be very frank, my reluctance was we're not hardware people. We don't want to be in the hardware creation business. We want to outsource as much of that as possible. And that held us up a little bit because until we got over that hurdle and said, nobody else is going to make this or care as much about how we want it to be as us. And then we found that partner in SI, which actually helps. We're still not in the hardware business, but we have a very solid partner that handles that part of it. So it took a long time to get to that stage. And I guess it's nice to see some of those things come to fruition. But my advice for that process is just keep looking, find the right thing for whatever your problem is you're trying to tackle.
And have you guys as an entity in your team been to Mobile World Congress, or was that just something that they submitted the project because of their participation and their role within the telecoms ecosystem?
So I had not been previously. They're more in the telecom business, and we submitted that. And one of the reasons that we submitted that was because of the sustainability aspects. And you mentioned some of this, but let me specifically address some of those things that we're looking at. One of them with this particular technology, and we talked about the impact on cattle health. There's also some impacts on cattle welfare. Can we treat them earlier, have a better outcome for those individual animals? We talk about resource conservation, so making sure that all those resources are put in, come through with the animals. And the part that we haven't really talked about, which I think is also important, is this augments our current labor force. So our labor force, and imagine, we've talked about it in simple terms of, okay, I'm going to go out and look at these calves and see if they're sick or not. There are people whose job every day is to go out and they may be monitoring 2,000, 3,000 individual animals. That's a super hard job. If we can provide them tools to more effectively do that job, that's where we've got some additional benefit. So for those reasons, and it's beyond just, okay, we're going to find some sick calves and treat them. It's beyond that. And as we were working with Eseye, they said this seems to be a good fit for this GLOMO process, especially on that sustainability side.
Yeah.
You mentioned the augmenting the human aspect of it, and that was one of my questions. So I guess the uplift is 27%. Was a document or a blog from SI saying there's an uplift of 27%. But I'd be curious, I think that publication was last year. What do you believe is the percentage identification that's actually possible? What accuracy can be achieved using this technology? Because I understand you say you've been doing iterations and trials and versions, but at some point you're going to say, we're there. What point are you going to go, we've cracked it, or is it just a continuum?
So if we think about accuracy, let's think about it in two ways. And one, the first way is I'm going to think about accuracy in terms of timing. So one thing that we have seen in our research is this device and monitoring the behavior will allow us to identify sick cattle 3 to 5 days before the observer. And I think we'll continue to be able to do that because we're identifying early signs of illness. So let's just use an example, then I'll come back to the other parts of accuracy. So we talked about sick cattle may be depressed, may be away from the group, right? That's when they become pretty sick, and that's pretty easy for me to identify as an observer. If I go out and I look and there's a whole group over here and there's one over there by himself, I'm like, hey, what's he doing?
Yeah.
Now, early in the disease process, what do? They actually hide in the group. Now, if I sent you out and I said, okay, I'm going to train you to go find sick cattle, and we're going to go out and there's a group of 20 and they're all huddled up together, and I say, find the sick one, you're not going to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to do it until he becomes sick enough that he's outside the group. So what we see with this technology, because we're using remote monitoring 24/7, we can find those sick cattle sooner. So that's one form of accuracy. Second form of accuracy is I could look at this both sides of the equation. If I call them sick, are they really sick? And if I call them healthy, are they really healthy?
Yeah, this
right. So I'm actually making two decisions at every point in time. And what we've seen from this system is if we compare it to human observers don't get that right nearly as often as we would like. They're doing the absolute best they can with the tools and resources they have. We have seen an improvement with this system. Where does it max out? It's not going to be perfect, but we would like to be able to get to that 85, 90% accuracy range or 95% accuracy. And we have focused more on if we call them sick, are they truly sick? And we've done multiple trials where we've followed these calves forward and worked on that identification process. So I think will be a large improvement over just the human observer by himself, but there's still going to be a human aspect to this. So this is one of the things that I think is important to weave into this conversation is this is not a replacement technology, right? This is not something, and you mentioned AI, machine learning. This is not something I'm going to put out there and say, okay, the computer's got it. Everybody else go home. No way.
No.
This is something that augments and supplements what we're doing in the field.
Yeah.
And together, those two will be way more accurate than individually.
Okay, interesting. And do you think there's a when you said that it gets the 95% accuracy, as you say, it's that augmentation. Where are you now in that process and what's next? Do you have to do more measuring? Is it tweaking the tags that you mentioned, different measurements? You're still, as I say, it's an ongoing project.
So it's not commercially available yet. And we have focused most of our recent time on getting the hardware both suitable for the environment and able to collect the data that we need in an efficient manner. And the next steps are we want to test that in larger scales. We've been down the road of we've tested these algorithms. We feel very comfortable. They work. They give us good feedback on the individual animals. And then when we have scaled them up in the past with other hardwares, not the one we're using currently, that's where we've run into issues when you get to the 2,000-3,000 head. So right now we're in process of scaling it up with this current hardware, and it's been very promising with a hope of having some commercial ready things in 2025.
Okay, great.
I was going to ask, because whenever you look at talking about worrying about animal welfare, especially custom designing hardware, people always say the cost of something, right? This device costs whatever. And obviously, Temple Grandin and the changes that this industry has actually proven that caring about welfare of the animal over time is going to have a long-term return on investment. But are you battling any cost per device issues, or where is that lying currently?
So it has to be cost effective. And so the device has to give a bigger return on investment than what it costs us. But that doesn't mean it has to cost a small amount.
Right.
Right. So it has to be effective in that whatever it costs us to put in, we get a bigger return. We've done some of the initial research on that. And as we scale up, I think we'll see that our cost efficiency will make it something that can be used widely. We're not looking to create a niche product that can only be used in a few specific situations. We're looking to create a product that can be used more broadly. And as you said, animal welfare is an important part of it, but animal welfare plays into, I work daily with people who take care of cattle like this, and they're wanting to do the best. We want to do the best thing for the animal to make sure that they have a healthy, productive life. So I think this will be something that will be another tool in their toolbox.
And if we look at the sort of value chain as a whole, because I'm sure you're better view of that as us, who are the people and let's say even the animals that you'd say benefit from this approach, the key stakeholders, let's say, and in what way? Question is simple. I don't think the answer is going to be.
You mean which segment will we apply to?
Well, I'm talking about the value chain of being able to solve this problem. Good starting point would be, I guess, a farm, but I'm just thinking of the major stakeholders in the value chain that are affected. It could be all the way up to McDonald's, exactly. But it's basically just who do you see? There's a business aspect to it. There's a welfare aspect to it. That's what I'm asking you really is, what do you see as like this solution? It has the waves and effects all the way along a line. It's applied in one place, but it actually affects upstream and downstream, right? It's people either side of that who are going to hopefully get something from it.
Yeah, I'm sure. It does affect throughout the value chain. When we think about making better decisions for treatment and the ability to document those, I think there's benefits there, obviously, for the producer who's working with the cattle directly hands-on day to day. I think there's benefits for the consumer because we're trying to produce a higher quality end product. I think there's benefits to potential distributors that want to say, okay, and when questions are asked, how were these animals handled? What was done? What was the process?
There's accountability.
We've got some documentation,
right?
And we've focused on respiratory disease or pneumonia in this case. But I think there are many other disease syndromes that also could tie into this process where we're monitoring behavior and highlighting who might be different.
And could that then go perhaps across animal species, not just for cows as well?
Sure. And there are lots of folks doing work in different areas. we've talked about across species, and our team's focus is on the beef cattle side.
And on the UN sustainability goals, which is something that we're keen to monitor, have you considered those and which ones you affect?
We haven't spent a lot of time on which of those. We have looked at broad sustainability goals. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we affect several areas, but I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically which of the UN one.
And just following on from that, you did mention you've done some testing in other parts of the world. I think you said yourself you wear several hats. You're a professor, you're a vet, you're a business entrepreneur. Is your intention to somehow license this to other people in the world, or are you going to give it to the world for other people to use? I'm talking about, obviously, I think there's a hardware component will be a sale through Eseye, but I guess your knowledge, particularly around the algorithms and the logic and all that, how's that going to be, let's say, distributed or made available?
Yeah, the big part that we want to accomplish is to be able to put in the hands of people the ability to better make some of these diagnoses. But to do that, we know we're going to have a continued refining process. This is not a one and done where you say,
Right.
okay, this is the algorithm and it applies everywhere. So I mentioned some of that information from around the world. We've actually found we need to make tweaks to make them as effective. So even individual operations. So we would see an ongoing component there, exactly what that looks like, but it's not buying something and then that's going to be it that way forever.
So even, let's say, you were able to deploy this, let's say in Australia, you would be quite important for you hands-on to be able to support them.
We have to have a support process,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
any of these, it's not just to have good execution. We have to be able to continue to implement the plan.
Okay.
And at this moment, is there anything that you guys really find yourself needing, again, from a connectivity perspective or from facing regulatory challenges around anything, just in order to share with our listeners, both in hopes that they might reach out and help or have information to share during the publishing?
Yeah, no specific challenges at this point other than just getting all the things that need to be done in a day done. So if somebody wants to come help with that part, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Do you see other people doing good outside of your working profession? Someone that you'd say, I'm impressed with this company, or how someone's approaching something? Because it's always good to also look beyond your own job and see what other people are doing, which is helpful to the wider world to broaden views.
I see people doing good all the time, right? I interact with students, I interact with faculty, I interact with people in the cattle industry, I interact with people outside the cattle industry. And I think there are a lot of folks out there doing good things.
Okay. And this is also an opportunity, as Frankie indicated. Is there a shout out that you'd like to do for your colleagues or someone who you feel is worth making noise about?
Yeah, I don't have anybody, but we've mentioned as we went through, and I'm here representing a group of partners in Precision Animal Solutions. We've worked a lot with Eseye on this project specifically. There's a lot of people that have put many hours into making this work. Appreciate you guys having me on.
That's
and
great.
It's incredible work, really. It is, again, when you hear the connected cow, in our industry, you think, why do we have to be connecting everything? But what you guys are doing, it just proves there is so much value that can be gained from people like yourself really identifying a problem and having access to more information so that we can make steps at every point to have sustainable impacts on things like beef production, which is a very important and very major impact in our world. So thank you for your help and for joining us today. We look forward to speaking with Eseye at some point in the future.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Thanks for all your time. If you want to hear more about this topic, please make a note of IoT Leaders, hosted by Nick Earls, who have an interesting podcast all around IoT. Thanks for taking the time to listen to our new podcast. If you have any feedback or know of any stories to be told, involving digital technology and telecoms doing good, then please do let us know via our email, getinTouch@digiteltalk.com. Also, feel free to send us a message on LinkedIn. It'd be great to hear from you.
Before we go, if you've enjoyed today's episode and would like to support the podcast, then don't forget to give us a follow and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Also, if you'd like to leave us a review or share it with your colleagues, it really helps us on the channel. Thanks so much for being a part of our audience today, and hopefully you'll join us next time.
That's all we've got time for, so it's goodbye from me.
And that's goodbye from him.
Bye
for now.
now.